It was the Gallant cylinder head that was inside of this box.
That's right, lady and gents. I'm about to complete a journey that I started back when I was only barely overdue for a haircut. I freshened this cylinder head up with a new set of valves in another video. This is a 90 cylinder head. Abe gave it to me completely bare. I have everything to fix that problem though. I've got shim seat springs, retainers, keepers, and that Sterilite Model 7240S cube tray. Intake and exhaust valves, lifters, rockers, more rockers, valve stem seals, stock regulator that I don't need, fuel injector seals, cam gears that I bought so long ago I don't even remember anything about them, ARP cam bolts, and if I can just find it, oh yeah, the Kegley oil pressure regulator. Never mind that I have all the cam caps and bolts too, but this cylinder head's fresh back from resurfacing, and now there's stuff I gotta do to it.
My first order of business is to tape this.
This thing has not been through its final cleaning yet, but I'm taping it up anyway. Anytime you have a freshly machined deck, your first responsibility is to protect it. I'm going to cut all these deck holes away to make that easier, but before I go even one step further, I just can't take it anymore. I can't allow this grotesque globule of a casting blemish to persist.
Oh! Ew! Dude!
For even one more moment. I grabbed an old set of valves to protect the seats, and I'm going to do as much of this like that as I can. That's what everyone needs right here, a booger right outside the short radius of the valve. There were certain places I couldn't reach without taking those valves back out, but I went really slow and I was really careful and I was very successful. It's ugly, but I'll clean up that in a minute. I was in the middle of something else I was trying to do. So yeah, all the coolant passages, bolt holes, oil returns, combustion chamber, you name it. Trimming all that stuff out, trimming every hole. The tape's protection from abrasion, not contamination. Protect the valve seats too. Use old valves if you've got them. If you wanted to be fancy, you could grind them flat, right down to the margin. That gives you more room to work if you're one of those combustion chamber polishing guys. I'm not doing that, I'm just saying. Polishing up that repair was easy as a Scotch-Brite wheel, and I managed to save the original contour of the combustion chamber that wasn't there anymore.
Very proud of you.
I want to make sure that it wasn't the edge of the tape that I was feeling, so I did an extra fine trimming job around the combustion chambers and then used a tightly rolled piece of 400 grit sandpaper to take off any sharp edges I could find anywhere. I found several, but knocked them all down and smoothed them out. Next, I gave everywhere I worked a vigorous scrubbing with 2+2, and the poly tape didn't even blink at that. If there's one thing that I hate when working in tight spaces on cars, it's slicing myself open and bleeding profusely over something stupid. This is not a quality control step, as it doesn't impede machining. Mitsubishi leaves this up to us to make it pretty or safe. I've seen some really bad ones before, but I usually see that on the inside. This one doesn't have that, but it made up for it with several long, thick, razor-sharp casting lines on the outside. I clean up the big ones with carbides and I finish with a sanding roll, but if yours aren't big and meaty like this, the sandpaper roll can do it all, really. It gets destroyed really fast is all. Now, oil port mod. I'm not even measuring this one first. I already know that it's wrong. I'm going for 95 to 100 thousandths here, which are the thickest two uncut second generation cylinder head depths that I've ever measured. And neither car's lifters ticked, but I'm going to start small, just grind a little bit down, but most importantly, roll that radius into the stud hole where the oil supply hole is. There's a really sharp edge here and I wanted to smooth that out. It's pretty obvious what the steel head gasket's for. It keeps me from widening out the hole while I work. There's a little bit of play between the bolt and the head gasket that lets me wiggle that straight edge gasket right up against the hole without distorting it, or its edge. As I try to hit my goal, I begin measuring to try to sneak up on it, and once I'm deep enough in there, I give it one last pass with a Scotch-Brite wheel to smooth everything over. Aside from stuff I'll be bolting on, that takes care of the oiling system. Now I've got some thick copper wire shoved through coolant hose that makes some fairly poor quality handles, but what these really do is it keeps the cylinder head off the bottom, away from the piezo's in my ultrasonic cleaner, so I don't damage the part or the cleaner. I got the water nice and hot first. The water is distilled water. It doesn't have any minerals in it. If you have this model of an ultrasonic cleaner, it takes 5 to 6 gallons in order to do this. And I broke the water surface tension with just a tiny bit of simple green. Not much. This cylinder head was previously cleaned with an extremely basic solvent and neutralized in a distilled water rinse, but there's still plenty of chemicals and dirt that were impregnated into this casting from that previous bath, as well as the resurfacing chunks, my grinding work, and anything else that ever managed to find its way in. So one more round through a clean distilled water bath, including the ultrasonic jostle for around 30 minutes total, including a soak because I also wanted to transfer the heat of the bath into the part. That's really important because you want the part to open up and let go of all the junk for starters, but when you're drying it, it really helps. Distilled water has no minerals, but it wants them. Any salts, minerals, water-soluble chemicals, like the kinds that this thing saw in its original cleaning, distilled water wants all of those impurities because it has none of them. It only works like this because of all the other prior cleaning that I did, and it works really well. But distilled water dries without spotting because of the things that aren't in it. But that water's pretty funky now, and that's the stuff that was all in that casting. Because the part's hot, your only responsibility is to get all the water out of it ASAP so that it doesn't have to evaporate. And if you did this right, it's going to be dry long before it cools back down to room temperature. If it's ferrous, oil it while it's hot. Now that all the grinding and cleaning of the cylinder head is done, I can install valve seals, just using a 10mm socket and an extension and a hammer to drive each one down until they stop, and then I give them another one for good luck, just to make sure it repeats the same sound a second time. Ah, the monotony. And now we can lose that 10mm socket forever somehow and install valves. I got a fresh batch of coffee filters. All I could find were the small ones, and they'll do. The valves are all numbered. Why? Because I made an extremely detailed video called Precision Valve Spring Install. You people think I made that video for you? No, 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 no. The level of detail I've undergone fitting and measuring all these parts to make them fit together the way they do, the $1,000+ of measurement tools I bought just so that I could sit there for 60 more hours over a spreadsheet that took 2 hours to make. Sure, I still have that spreadsheet, but all that matters is the valves go 1 to 8 for the intake and the exhaust valves from the cam gears towards the transmission side of the engine, just like number 1 through 4 is for the pistons and the block. After fitting brand new valves into existing seats, I vacuum tested the daylights out of this one and dialed in all 16 valves to a perfect seal and a perfect fit. The seats were that good to start with, and in the next video I measured and dialed my valve seat pressure to exactly 86 pounds on every single valve, which is also ideal for my cams and boost level. And then I took it all apart. I checked my own video first before doing this, 3 times actually, frame by frame, making sure I put all the things in the boxes and ice cube trays the way I marked them. And I did. I marked them 1 through 8 on the timing side, and as long as I keep the ice cube tray oriented like this on the top of the cylinder head, the same way I marked it, then I know exactly where every single one of all 193 of these parts go without having to repeat that 60+ hours of work and research again. Because I never tipped this ice cube tray over. The cylinder head's been resurfaced, and I did not mix anything up in my video according to my container's markings. I did a quadruple take on this, because so much can go wrong from simple mistakes. In the Precision Valve Spring Install video, I demonstrated how just the manufacturing alone yields a variation in tolerances of a couple thousandths per part. All that stuff stacked up. Valve, shims, seats, springs, retainers, keepers, everything, not just the machining. It only takes a few thousandths to change seat pressure by whole pounds. Do you have to have all the exact same seat pressures on every single valve for your engine to perform? No, but I did it anyway, and I did it to prove that it could be done, that it was an attainable starting point. I didn't do it by machining every single part. I did the vast majority of it by measuring and shuffling parts around, using all of their imperfections to make a perfect fit. I modified as little as possible, and it worked. But to put it all back together this time around, I'm going to use what's likely a familiar tool that's much more attainable to all of you than Jamie's cylinder head workbench. I'm going to use this 4G63 valve spring installer tool. It's a billet machine piece of aluminum with 4 guide holes for a threaded plunger and a couple of bolts and washers and some elongated holes that let you slide it around on the cam cap guides to center it. And I borrowed it. You see, it's got this threaded rod thing with an Allen head that you can use as a plunger. There's also this jig that gives you access to the top of the valve and a reducer for people like me using beehive springs because the beehive retainer is smaller than the stock valve. Lots of people sell this tool, and STM Tune has one like it. Let's go ahead and put it on there and get rigged up. And you want to do this finger tight and then finger loosened again, not even snug. It helps you get centered a little easier if it can slide around. Leave your wrenches in the drawer. Except an Allen wrench, those are nice, especially if they're magnetic, but those are for spoiled people. What helps you use this right is not doing it wrong, because I totally did. You'll see me go fishing for a few of them along the way. It's got a feel for it. But the best advice is to first put the keepers into the retainer holes, then press on the keepers with your fingertip while you compress the spring until those keepers pop over the valve stem. And then you keep compressing the spring past their slot on that valve. Turn it the other way to release the spring and engage the locks. Sometimes things don't seat, things shift around under load, and sometimes it's helpful to put it in forward and reverse a few times if stuff gets into a bind. No matter how many times you've done it and how bad you still suck at it, this is the valve spring tool that gives you all the time in the world to figure everything out. It's not faster than Jamie's cylinder head fixture, but it gives you an extra hand back. Of course, putting my finger on the keepers really works against getting a good camera angle. I suppose once the keepers are in the right place and the spring's compressed, I don't really need to do it anymore, so I can get a shot of the keepers keeping. I'll do that. We have time. Moving to a new valve is as easy as unscrewing a bolt, restacking the fixture, and screwing a bolt back in. You can service 4 valves without re-rigging the fixture. It offers finger-tight rigging in one of 4 spots to service all 16 valves. Simple. And by completing this step, I will have secured 120 parts permanently into their new homes, clearing out an entire toolbox drawer and having the top half of my Galant engine built. All of this foraging, parts collecting, measuring, swapping, remeasuring, vacuum testing, precision resurfacing, and extra scrutiny is going to lead to a quality part, the likes of which this car has never known. Not even from the factory, and I know it's going to make an immediately noticeable impact on its cold starts. The old cylinder head's valve seats only worked because all of the carbon buildup inside the guides was the only thing keeping the valves aligned. Had I cleaned it all out and reused it again, it would have failed catastrophically because the valves would have been all over the place. It was really bad. I'm impressed 1229 still ran like that, but it was a really hard one to start, and we know that it was like that because of a Band-Aid fix after a timing belt special. Well, that's a thing of the past. All of these parts are brand new, and we've extensively measured the casting to prove that it's at the beginning of spec, unmachined and unworn in almost every single way before we started. I can't be happier about how this one's turning out. Yeah, by now you figured out that my Allen wrench is magnetic. Let's look at this closer, shall we, if that's possible? Of course it is. By the 16th valve, you get pretty good at it even in the tight spots. When it's all stacked up and assembled correctly, each assembly is just held together by the spring load, and that's why all these tools are so uncomplicated. The precision is all built into the parts and the assembly. The mechanics of it's all really very simple. The most important thing you can do to guarantee success with it is to stay centered above the valve. The spring's going to let you compress it. You'll just keep knocking the keepers out of their holes if you're not straight. Staying centered helps you make that room that the keepers need to fit down in there before you release the tension. The foot of this tool's diameter is intended to fit inside the reliefs in the aluminum cast right next to each valve, so you want it right up against that before you load it up. That'll help you stay centered. You'll feel the valve pushing the keepers out of the hole with your fingertip if you're not lined up straight. And of course, if you choose to install the keepers last, or you keep dropping your keepers and get to practice doing this fixture gives you plenty of access room, and it has more patience than you do. Sorry for obstructing your view so much, it's just a tight fit. And it's easier for me to do the finger thing using this tool because it gives you lots of feedback by braille. You'll figure that out quick if you're the one doing it. Next up is the cam caps, and this is really just place holding for the moment. The rest of the parts involved in this assembly require cams to be installed or else they'll fall out, and I'm not quite ready for that yet. I'll seal up this oil system later after the cams are in it. It's tempting to bolt this regulator on because it's easy to do. I'm actually not done cleaning and fixing stuff yet, so we'll wait. The thing wrong with this head that I alluded to earlier was acid damage. Fortunately for this head, when it occurred, the cams were in it. Everything was oily, used, and still assembled. That's the only thing that saved it. It's apparent that this valve cover wasn't on it at the time unless it was completely eaten through, so none of it penetrated any of its critical bits. All that made it out just fine, but the acid certainly ate away at the surrounding aluminum. Just look at that. All around the parts where the valve cover is supposed to seal. And I'll fix that because I don't want an oily mess on the front of my engine. This is like this head's supervillain creation story. Someone's lab experiment went wrong, it got grossly disfigured, Jaffro rebuilds it because he has the technology, and it lives on to go seek its revenge. I'm going to snug all these cap bolts because though it was assembled and it was oily when this calamity occurred, there's still some damage on these journal that leaves me questioning whether some of it crept in there or if I've got material embedded, and therefore the potential for high spots. There are 0 signs of oil starvation, but there are some signs of trash or oil contamination that got in there, and I want a closer look at that. So I'm going to use as little of a destructive test as possible. Using the same rolled up piece of 400 grit sandpaper I cleaned up the edges of the deck with, just with that section of it ripped off, I went about 8 to 10 revolutions with fingertip pressure against the journal. Only in areas that I could feel did I give it anything more than that. Some got even less. There were 4 journals grooved from the oil holes, and my efforts here aren't to make the journals bigger, it's to make the journals shiny, and the high spots a whole lot shinier. This leaves the low spots dark and discolored. You only get one set of cam bearings per engine, and those are the things that I'm putting sandpaper on right now. I know, this makes me cringe too, but this is just an aggressive cleaning and inspection. It's not going to change my oil clearance. Now with it back apart, 2 of the caps facing the oil holes that had contamination grooves have some slight discoloration facing that groove, but no high spots to be found. We've got smooth and shiny everywhere else, so those are good. The intake side is spectacular, better than I expected really. The stuff that I was the most concerned about with the high spots were the ones that got grooved from the oil holes, and I never saw the cams to determine the full story, but all these cleaned up great, and those grooves are low spots, so there's enough meat around all that to be insignificant. What do you want for a 35-year-old used cylinder head? I want 9 exhaust studs in it, that's what I want. I'm just putting the factory ones back in. They've been blackened. 8 of these are simple, and 1 is not because Mitsubishi. 1 penetrates the head oil return galley, and if you don't seal that bolt hole up real good with RTV, then you'll forever burn oil in and around your exhaust manifold. Installing the Easy 8 just involves double nutting the stud and driving it into its shoulders, but there's an easy trick to make a foolproof seal on that center stud. Use a quality sealant, Tri-Bond, Honda Bond, something with a temperature rating, and some kind of stubbornness to really hold on tight. Goop a bead of it inside that hole. Put your finger on the back of it, rig up your double nut thing, and drive it all the way through while trying to seal up that hole with your finger. Yes, it's going to squish and goop out everywhere around it, but you can easily clean that up. What you want is to have driven it through anywhere that air was able to leak or RTV could get through and seal every single thread all the way down. That's what the finger and the precious for. You can only do this with the head off the car, and doing it right now is a permanent fix that will never leak. Speaking of oil leaks, I never thought I'd be repairing something like this here. You're probably thinking the exact same thing, but why this is necessary is that putting heat into that part will irreparably destroy it. There's a crystalline structure in cast aluminum that will be disrupted by welding it, and it won't survive the thermal cycle of welding for a problem that could easily just be stopped by using some type of epoxy or sealant. As you saw, mechanical parts on this head are all sound. This is just a little bit more than a cosmetic issue because it's a gasket sealing surface. I can't put aluminum back in that hole, and I'm not going to seal up the front corner of the engine with globs of RTV, so here I am sculpting with JB Weld. All I really need to do is fill these burnt out cavities with enough epoxy that it's flat enough for the gasket to seal up and do its job. I want the appearance and future serviceability to still be exactly the same as if it never happened. So I'm taking the time to fill all these cavities. If this is indeed the engine's head, then I suppose I'm doing dentistry. It fixes my problem, stops the pain and bleeding, and this would be a completely stupid reason for keeping such a spectacular cylinder head like this off the street. While that dries, I'm going to make good use of my time and start cleaning up cam journals, gasket sealing surfaces, and lifter buckets with white things. I brushed out the main galleys when it was in the ultrasonic cleaner, but I don't want to do anything abrasive to these buckets. Their diameter matters. You want the oil to leak through the lifter, not all around it. So I'm extra non-aggressive here with 2+2 and Q-tips just to clean the funk out. It's not about working smart here. It's all about working hard and stinky. Yeah, you can only take so much of this. You want shiny, silvery, clean lifter buckets, just like this. There's a dimple in the bottom. Get that first, because it's going to foul every Q-tip immediately if you don't. That's where all the trash and varnish ends up. And here's an example of everything the hot solvent ultrasonic bath left behind, everything the hot distilled water and simple green bath left behind, and what I'm getting out of here with 2+2 and Q-tips until they come out white and clean. You'll see me stuff coffee filters in there too to soak up dirty solvent. Using non-aggressive means like this means it's going to take a little bit of time. You're going to get dirty, but you get through it. Commence aggressive compressed air cycle. I brushed out the oil galleys again, and I blew them all out with 2+2 and compressed air yet again, but I was between memory cards and oblivious to it. 27 Q-tips. Yeah, 27. Definitely 27. 6 coffee filters, that's how many it took before they started coming out clean. ultrasonic cleaners don't do everything, and that's why I'm still cleaning up everything here and on and up to the point of installing the parts. But this means that I can now seal up this oil system, and on this cylinder head that starts with 9 oil galley plugs. These are the plugs that came out of it, which I've carefully removed all the sealant from. There's a better thread sealant than what I'm using, but this blue Permatex thread locker is oil formulated and it's going to seal very well and lock this plug in place. So this is still the right stuff for the job. It's just not the best stuff like Permatex #1 formula is. There's reason to leave one of these open, and I'll get to it in a minute. 2 of these galley plugs supply the cam journals, 2 of them supply the lifter galleys. There's plugs on both ends. On the cam gear side, you plug all 4 of them. The one on the front of the exhaust side here is where they cross-drilled the cam journal oil galleys together, and to connect them to the main oil supply, which is drilled through the top of the cylinder head from the regulator. You don't want to spew oil in your first startup, so you want to plug all these real tight, except for this one. This one you might not want blocked because it's often used as an oil feed for your turbo. At least that's the case for mini DSMs. So if you're getting your oil supply from somewhere else, then plug it, but this car's going to get it from right there. There should be at least 9 plugs in a 1989 to 1996 DSM cylinder head, unless it's a G6S, then it only has 5. I'm now at the stage where I'm settling the miscellaneous stuff like all the other studs for the cam angle sensor and for the thermostat housing. Those are going to be convenient when the time comes. Some people use bolts here, like all the 2G guys, but gallants are just fancy like this. Yet another vigorous cleaning. You can never be too clean during your assembly, just saying. Because the flange for this hydraulic lash adjuster regulator thing is right up here too, and it's due time to free it from its wrapping and install it. It just has to be clean first. No sealant nor gasket included nor recommended. Let's go, fit the factory bolts, just transfer those right on over and torque it to 8 foot-pounds. And in order for me to go any further on this cylinder head, I'm going to have the block in here because valves are going to have to move. And that's not something I can easily do on the workbench. Not like having the block involved here will. Did you miss me? I'm just trying to keep this video on topic is all. This is a video about a cylinder head. A cylinder head that's overdue for having its valves set. And by that I mean brass punch and a hammer. The goal is to lock the keepers and retainers firmly into place by beating on them. Don't worry, you can give them a good whack. Just be sure you always hit them straight on. There's 86 pounds of seat pressure according to my math fighting you, and you'll never get them into bind, but you might launch your punch once or twice. Your goal is to shock them to get the retainers to fully seat, and to do it right now before you do the rest of your assembly. It's the kindest thing you can do for the rest of your parts. You showed them you care. And perhaps the ones that remain will be a little bit scared and a little bit more willing to comply, you know? So what's next? Lifters. Brand new unopened set of top lines. Might as well seal up that part of the oil system as well too, because those are fairly large holes where the buckets intersect with the oil galley. So we're at a good stage to go ahead and put those things in there too. I'm not using any fancy lubricants in here, just motor oil is enough. I'm giving it a couple of squirts in the holes and on the lifters to ensure there's enough to coat everything in that hole, including the dimple at the bottom. Work it around a little bit. And it stinks in here because of all the cleaning I've done today. The epoxy's doing what I feared it would. It looks like it's shrinking as it dries. Hope it's not going to need a second coat, but I've still got several hours before that could even happen. We'll come back and visit this one tomorrow. It's tomorrow, and I don't want to waste any time. This one definitely did shrink, so I'm going to get right to mixing up some JB Weld and getting another coat on there. I don't think my gasket's going to want to be that flexible, and I definitely want to go ahead and get this stuff spread on here because I'm starting to get super impatient with it. Whenever this thing is setting, I'm never here long enough for it to dry so that I can finish this job and move on. But I have to be patient or else it's going to show up in my work that I'm doing here. That shrinking might be from air settling out of it after it's mixed, or maybe it's sinking deeper into those cavities. I suppose you can always do it right the second time, Hopefully 2 is all it takes. It's not stinky in here today. The ventilation system actually works great. Only clean filtered air ever gets in here. It just takes a while to push the fumes out if you make them. My filter doesn't do the CFMs, and I'm not trying to blow stuff around or blow the flap open. But moving on, it's been 24 hours in a clean room since I've had to clean anything, and we can't have that. All that's left is what you see that's missing. So naturally, I'm going to clean all that stuff now, real good. And next, just so I don't forget, I'm going to burp all 16 of the lifters we dropped in here yesterday. I'm just using a piece of welding wire to push open the check valve inside each lifter, then compressing it, removing the tool, and letting go of it. It's an attempt to purge any excess oil that might cause problems later. There is and will still be oil in there, but if it's stuck or it's pumped up full of oil, it could cause a problem when you're putting it in time. This is just a final checklist item I like to do, give them all a how you doing. Next, I'm going to start by lubing the tips of all 16 of these lifters and valves. Pretty straightforward, no need to overdo it, not yet. It's okay to spread it around with your fingertips if you've got brand new set of gloves on there. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and grab a box of rockers, which is only 2 per box in case you were curious. You need twice as many of these boxes as you do for the lifter boxes. There's a lot of debate about big hole and small hole factory rockers, stamped steel Evo rockers. Well, these are no hole rockers that I have no reason to feel skeptical about because just like everything else in this cylinder head they're about to meet, they're brand new. I'm lubricating the lifter pads and the sides of the bearings too. I then roll the rockers around just to fully coat every single bit of the bearing contact surfaces. Still not done cleaning. Fine. All 12 of the caps get a final bath with denatured alcohol in their disassembled state because they'll be ready to go for what's next. I even clean the one that's still drying. Next, just to freshen up the assembly lube because it's time to do the fun thing that helps it keep all its guts in. I'm installing new parts freshly out of sealed packaging. They were packaged in oil and my expectations for them are to be clean. That started to bug me a little bit as I opened up my first intake camshaft and cut its sealed oiled bag open to find that when I cleaned it, all I did was clean off all the clean oil. It was fine. They included the assembly lube that they want me to use, which just looks like a different color of the exact same kind of stuff that I'm already using. But why not? Let's slather all that all up on there. From New Zealand with love. Stay. I should be putting caps on right now, but for whatever reason I felt like making this look like a crime scene instead. It's okay, this is all make-believe in an internet video. Seriously, Jaffro, that was way too much. There can be too much sometimes. But there's those caps I was talking about. Don't go too far because there's another camshaft coming, and wha-bam! There it is! Bolts too. Caps and bolts. Even the last one that's still drying. Setting up the wrench for 15 pounds. We'll get to that last cap once it's needed, which is right now. Now, whether you're running the bolts down or you're torquing these bolts, use the proper tightening order for your camshafts and gradually sneak up on snug first. You might have to go at it several times just to avoid overloading the camshaft in any one spot as it starts coming in contact with all the rockers and starts opening the valves because it starts loading it up, yeah. So just like setting the valves, this is why I'm doing it on the block. It gives those valves some room to open. But once snug, you start with the center cap closest to the timing side and work your way down, alternating sides from the center to the outside. Repeat this exactly the same way for each camshaft. And you'll notice if you were paying attention that I didn't. Was it on purpose or was that make-believe? Let's do the alternate ending first because there were some good scenes in there. Like this one. This is where I grab a brand new individually bagged OEM set of cam seals and tear their packaging open to put them to work. And that cam seal driver tool that I bought years back in anticipation of this day, that thing's pretty cool. Yeah, does the trick every single time. For the 10 whole times you'll need it in your life. Here's the super close-up of it. And there's this other scene of a brand new set of ARP cam bolts, which get used to secure a brand new set of AEM True Time cam gears. Putting thread locker on those things, running those bolts all the way down by hand because it's good like that. All these parts are brand new, isn't it great? Getting a 14mm 12-point socket out and setting my torque wrench to 70 foot-pounds, holding the hex with a crescent wrench while torquing the bolts because it's a perfect world with perfect videos. Just, the parts go right on there, perfect every time. Just pop some injector seals in there, 1, 2, 3, 4. Get those intake studs ready to go, and that's how it went, right? In the real life ending, I still had parts I need to fix, man. All right, it's the next day. I think that this is going to clean up just fine. Looks like I might have got under it this time. I think. It shrunk a little bit, but I got to clean the top side of that up first, so we'll see where that goes. I'm going to clean this cap up. And my memory card's going to end because I forgot to format it. But I did most of this with a flat file. All the deep pits and divots have been filled with something that looks like a gasket's going to want to stick to it. The entire outer radius of the valve cover sealing surface feels smooth. Let's just put this thing back on there and look at the other side. Now this is where it gets weird. Excuse me for a second. Yeah, like I said, this is where it gets weird. Got a pretty good line going right up to the edge of that thing. There's a little bit of a bulge on it, and I need to knock that down. And I'm going to use a flat file across the top to level everything here, trusting that this is going to be softer than the aluminum, and that I will wipe this surface out flush with the rest of everything else here. We'll just have to see how this goes, and I need to make all of my motions going that way to push the funk out of this side. Wish me luck. Here in fast motion, you can see how the file is leveling the JB weld. I'm frequently wiping my file off to keep my mess contained, and you'll see me applying pressure to the spot that I want to level. The acid didn't wipe out the whole surface, it just undermined where the gasket would be, so there is a whole lot of material here to use as a guide. I'll be able to make that work. And of course, more cleaning. And that's before taking it back apart for more cleaning, applying a thin bead at the back of the seal boss because of the acid etching that occurred on the inside lip of only the upper side. Look at me, I'm so bad at this I can't even get it in frame. What you don't know is that I'm actually capturing a larger area than what you can see, and I still can't get it in frame. I suck. But you get it. I just want the extra leak insurance here, so when I put it back together, torque it properly, and then hammer my seal in here, there's a little extra leak insurance filling the voids if there are any. Nice framing there, Jaffro. That's why you saw me torque that one last and out of order. So that's the in real life ending. Things had to be fixed still. Kinda ruined using some good scenes because of it, but I suppose these are gonna do. I had most everything sorted on this head before the assembly began, and I'm chuffed about how the journals and this repair turned out. There's another trick I can do with the gasket, but I'll be able to save this one and service it like any other DSM with the repair that I've performed. And I did it without damaging or completely destroying it with heat. That valve cover trick, instead of just applying tri-bond just at the corners of the hump, I'm going to apply it all the way across both humps. It's not the way the factory service manual says to do it. My gasket's extremely pliable right now because it's new, but by occupying some of the space behind the gasket with sealant, it's going to have less room in the groove to compress. By doing that all the way around the curve, I hope to make the timing side of the seal squeeze the humps on number 1 a little bit harder. Of course, I did it to the other side of the gasket too, just to even things out. And I know when I compress it, it's going to squish out on both sides, on the inside and the outside of the valve cover. That's okay, that's fine. I'm mating these parts together. They'll squish into each other's shape, and that's how I want it set up. But I'll still be taking it back loose again. Not just to clean up all the RTV. I mean, look at that thing. I kind of really don't want to take it back apart at all, but I'm going to do it. I have to. I forgot the half moon seal over by number 4 on the exhaust cam. Smart. I'm just using the Evo seal. The DSM one's out of production and it doesn't last forever like this one does. Just like the DSM one, you got to cement this thing in there with tri-bond. Go almost as deep as the groove. The excess will just squish out. Jam that sucker in there, and the service manual says you need to top its seams with a bead of RTV as well. I'm going to do it, but I'm still going back in here again later someday, long after this is set up, to torque the cam bolts. Because in real life endings, Jaffro hasn't found his timing tins yet, and that's a stupid reason not to end a video. So yeah, the tins go on the cylinder head prior to torquing the cam gear, so all that stuff about thread locker and crescent wrenches, yeah, all that was nonsense. That's all fake. In a perfect world with perfect videos, maybe, I'm just shrink wrapping these on here so that I have them. I'll torque them later. And I just finished turning 230 parts into one big heavy brand new one. I assembled the top half of the Galant engine. This started out in someone's scrap pile, and today it's even nicer than the one this car came with from the factory because it's loaded with Kelford TX264s, quality GSC valves, precision-tuned Kegley Beehive springs, and everything's in spec, milled and ready to go with Detective Coating's crown on it. I'll find those 10s, don't worry, real life is pretty dang sweet, if you ask me.